Good morning. I'm David, and thank you for joining me for another episode of The Late Disciple. We continue our discussion of the book of Matthew today as Jesus concludes his Sermon on the Mount, and we learn of his many acts of healing and casting out of demons, beginning in chapter 8. As Jesus finishes his sermon, he's followed down the mountain by large crowds and confronted by a leper who asks Jesus to heal him if he's willing, and Jesus does. By asking in this way, the leper shows that he has faith in Jesus' power to heal. He only doubts his willingness, probably doubting his own worthiness. At this time in history, anyone unfortunate enough to contract leprosy was considered unclean, both physically and spiritually. It was commonly believed that leprosy was a curse bestowed upon sinners by God. Lepers were to wear torn clothing, avoid contact with others, and even announce themselves as unclean so that people could keep a wide berth. It was socially unacceptable to even approach a leper. But Jesus unhesitatingly accepts the presence of this diseased man, touches him, and with the simple words, "Be clean," the man is immediately cleansed of his leprosy. But Jesus then tells him not to tell anyone of this encounter, beyond his obligation to present himself to a priest who can affirm he's no longer leprous. There are several possible reasons for this instruction. This was early in Jesus' ministry, and he wasn't too keen yet in drawing the attention of either Roman or Jewish figures of power. Also, he probably didn't want to be known only as a miracle worker. His focus was on preaching the word, not gathering crowds solely for the sake of healing. Jesus also heals the servant of a Roman centurion, a Gentile and an outsider who approached Jesus, not asking him to come to his house, but simply to say the word so that his paralyzed servant might be healed. He explains that as a man under authority, he understands how true power works, and Jesus is so marveled by this demonstration of faith that he tells the soldier he'll find his servant to be healed when he returns home. Later, while staying at Peter's home, Jesus finds Peter's mother-in-law bedridden with a fever. With a simple, compassionate touch of his hand, she's instantly healed, and not only rises from her sick bed, but begins serving him right away. Word spreads quickly, and that evening, crowds gather at the house, many bringing those who are sick or possessed. Jesus heals them all, showing that his power and mercy shows no limits. After a long day filled with teaching, healing, and casting out demons, Jesus and his disciples set out to cross the lake and get a break from the growing crowds. Jesus, weary from all of his work, is sleeping peacefully at the bottom of the boat. This peaceful lake crossing is soon anything but, as a terrible storm comes upon them. As the storm intensifies, Jesus continues to sleep peacefully in the bottom of the boat, until eventually the disciples start to panic and they wake Jesus and they ask him to save them from the storm. And Jesus does exactly this. He rebukes the storm, and instantly the lake is once again calm. The disciples are in awe of the power he displays, while Jesus, unsurprised but disappointed, challenges them for their lack of faith. Let me pause here momentarily. The New International Version of the Bible refers to this body of water as a lake, while the New American Standard Bible refers to it as a sea. The body of water in question is the Sea of Galilee, and despite its name, we can see that this is a landlocked body of water, and therefore it's a lake. Now, what seafaring folk would call a landlubber. So, to my inexperienced mind, I wouldn't expect terrible storms on a lake. But, thanks to Google, I can share that the Sea of Galilee is 680 feet below sea level and surrounded by hills rising up to 2,000 feet. Cool, dry air from the hills collides with the warm, moist air of the semi-tropical lake, causing sudden, powerful winds to funnel down through the terrain. Because of its shallow depth of 200 feet, the lake is quickly stirred up, making storms both rapid and dangerous for small boats. So, violent storms coming from seemingly nowhere wouldn't be out of the ordinary here. Having said that, let's also bear in mind that Jesus' disciples are experienced fishermen. They've spent perhaps their entire lives perfecting their trade in this area. So, if they're so terrified that they woke Jesus pleading for help, then we can safely assume that this was a storm greater than their past experience. Something else to note is that, up to this time, we've read of occasions in which Jesus heals the sick and drives demons from the possessed. But this is the first instance in which we see Jesus demonstrate raw power in calming what we can reasonably assume is the worst storm ever experienced by these fishermen with a simple rebuke. Later, they arrive at the other side of the lake in an area known as the Gadarenes, and they're met by two demon-possessed men who've been living in tombs nearby. These men were so violent and powerful that no one was able to pass through this area for fear of attack. Although not mentioned in the book of Matthew, we do learn later in Mark that despite having been bound by shackles and chains, their strength is so great that they can't even be restrained. So, these are dangerous men. As they approach, they say to Jesus, "What do you want with the Son of God? Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" And when Jesus doesn't reply, the possessed men then begin to beg Jesus that if he's going to drive them out, at least drive them into the herd of pigs which happen to be nearby. With a single word, Jesus says, "Go," and the demons are cast into the herd of pigs. Immediately, the newly possessed pigs drown themselves by rushing down a steep embankment into the water there. There's a bit to unpack in this interaction between Jesus and the possessed men. First, these men immediately recognize Jesus as the Son of God, calling him this specifically upon sight. That's more acknowledgement than Jesus ever received from the Pharisees. Second, despite their extraordinary strength, they're clearly frightened of Jesus, since instead of threatening or attacking him, they instead attempt to negotiate by asking him to cast them into the nearby herd of pigs. Presumably, this would be to avoid being cast into the abyss, as referenced in other gospel accounts. Lastly, why do the pigs drown themselves? Though not specified, I think it's probably safe to assume that the pigs, having only the mind of an animal, were so horrified upon being possessed that they simply ran in panic and ended up drowning themselves as a result. Later, the townfolk were of course thrilled to be rid of these demon-possessed men, right? Well, no, it didn't shake out like that. Apparently, the financial loss incurred by the drowning of their pigs, which may have been numbered in the hundreds by some estimates, was enough for them to plead that he leave, and Jesus did. Arriving back in Capernaum sometime later, Jesus performs additional acts of healing, including healing a paralytic, a blind man, a mute, and bringing a young girl back from death itself. It is during this visit in Capernaum that Jesus finds and recruits Matthew, who at the time was sitting in a booth performing his job as tax collector, among the most reviled of occupations at this time. Soon after, Jesus is having dinner at Matthew's house. Also in attendance are other tax collectors, sinners, and Jesus' disciples. Upon observing this, local Pharisees attempt to chastise Jesus and question the company he keeps. It's worth noting that in the culture of this time, sharing a meal is a deeply personal affair. Doing so implied friendship, fellowship, and unity. Casual lunches just weren't really a thing. Unsurprisingly, Jesus uses this as a teaching opportunity and tells the Pharisees, "It is not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means." This is a decisive slapdown. Jesus not only emphasizes the need of sinners who recognize their brokenness, but he also delivers a cutting rebuke with, "Go and learn what this means," clearly implying that the Pharisees don't even understand the basics of the faith that they claim to uphold. Similarly, John's disciples asked Jesus why they and the Pharisees fast often, but his disciples don't. The fact that they mention the Pharisees leads me to believe that they were put up by this by said Pharisees. At this time, fasting was frequently practiced, but like many traditions, the local religious leaders often turned it into a public performance. They would wear special clothing and behave in ways that advertised their suffering. I call this performance fasting, and just like performance prayer, these acts were meant at least as much to be seen by followers as they were to honor God. Jesus shuts this down too, using the analogy of a wedding party, implying that as long as Christ is present with them, there is joy, not sorrow. And fasting is for seasons of sorrow and intense prayer. Jesus 2, Pharisees 0. So, once again, Matthew packs a lot into just 2 chapters. Power, conflict, revelation, and more than one helping of humble pie for the religious elites. In the next video, we'll discuss Jesus' grant of authority to his disciples as he sends them out into the world to dispense healing of their own. I hope you'll join me for that. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and if you didn't, by all means, press the other button. Comments are always welcome, and please do consider subscribing. And as always, remember, we are all disciples. It is never too late.